Will Furry, of course.
Good
We're gonna
morning.
we're gonna be recording in just a moment. As soon as Mark give me the go ahead, we're gonna do that. Let me see if I can get my computer on. Let me make sure my phones are off so it won't be dinging. And I saw last night they swore in the new
Yes, we
superintendent, so I'll
did.
probably mention that too.
Okay, very
Or
good.
whatever. Just talk some positive stuff that's going on. I'm gonna stay away from the school board attorney because I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah,
I don't want to talk about that.
that's
No,
still in the works. But
exactly. So I don't want to talk about that.
yeah.
All right, Mark, whenever you're ready.
You are now tuned in to Today with Pastor Jay on WNZF News Radio, where we discuss inspiring and informative news. And now here's your host, Pastor Jerlyn Denny.
Good morning. Good morning. Wake up and good morning. It is a beautiful day, a wonderful day, a nice brisk day. I'm starting to love this fall weather. Now, of course, Florida has a couple of seasons, warm and hot. That's pretty much the way that it is, and we're in our warm season. And sometimes it gets a little cool. It really does. I was happy to be able to pull a couple of sweaters out, and I'm looking at the boots I'm going to wear. And even though it's going to be warm, before the end of the day, it's always good to have just a couple of things to do. It is. Amen. So, but my guest this morning is the Honorable Will Furry.
Good
How
morning, Pastor
cool
Jay.
is that?
Thanks for having me on.
I love having you on for a number of reasons. One, not only are you just a phenomenal man of God, you're a great husband and father to your kids, but you're my brother, my brother in Christ, and I can say that. So it's
Amen.
always good to see you have such wisdom. You're steady, and you're just open and loving to all people, and I just want you to know that I admire
Well,
you
thanks
for
for
that.
sharing that.
Yeah, I really and truly do. But you're on the school board and you've been there now for almost a
It'll
year.
be a year on November 22nd. I was sworn in 22, so
Yeah. So how's that going?
it's going very well. It's a process. You get elected.
Mm-hmm.
I've described it. It's like you're running for office, and it's like you're in a wind tunnel with hurricane force winds coming at you every single day, and then boom, you win the election, and then the wind just stops,
The wind stops.
and you're like, now it's time to get to work.
The work begins then, right?
Right, but it's a very surreal moment when you make that transition from candidate to elected official.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't think I would imagine most people that have run for public office will realize that you never really understand the amount of responsibility and
Mm-hmm.
effort it's going to take until you get into the job, right?
Right.
So you have to be someone who's willing to rise to the occasion, because it will be more than you expect.
Do you feel the weight and the responsibility
I do.
for the district and for the students, not just your constituents, but I mean, you're molding lives. Even though you're on a school board, you're establishing and helping with policy and things like that. Those are weighty issues.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't bog me down, but I feel the weight. Let me put it that way, because and
Mm-hmm.
that started from back when I started to realize more and more as I ran for office that this is less about me and more about this community, right? And the people would come up to me and say, "Hey, Will, we're counting on you to be our voice, to do
Mm.
what we see fit in school," right? And so it wasn't what I wanted to do; it was what my constituents wanted to do. So I take that into account every time I make a policy decision.
So this past weekend, you were among about 200 people throughout the state of Florida that toured the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, where there was a crazy shooter that killed about 17 people, injured 17 more about 5 years ago. How did you get involved in this tour and touring this school?
So this building had been preserved
Sitting there.
as evidence.
Yeah.
Right. It was basically a time capsule. It was stopped in time. So this building, it looks exactly the way it did the day of the shooting.
Mm.
Right. How I got involved is that the Max Schachter, I believe, if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, he's the father of Alex, who was one of the first children murdered on that
Mm.
day. And he took it upon himself to get out there and and advocate for school safety, right? And actually, he has an organization called Safe Schools for Alex.
Mm.
And so they decided that this building would eventually be torn down for and made into a memorial, because there's several buildings on this campus. This is
Right.
one building of this school, right? And but they felt it would be important to tour through policymakers, legislators, school administration one more time before it is torn down, so that they could learn from the mistakes that were made and the improvements that hopefully inspire improvements in campus security.
You were quoted as saying, "Today was one of the most difficult and emotional experiences of my life."
That is
I mean,
correct.
just being on that campus, not just being on the campus, but also being a school board member for Flagler County Schools, thinking about what if something like that happened here. I mean, I can't even imagine the gravity of it as you walk around. Talk about it being a time capsule. It was said that the glass that was shattered was still there on the ground. I mean, all the things that had happened was just there. And you just being walked through with several other people, going through this time capsule, going back in time 5 years, as you would say, and seeing what had happened when a gunman decided to come in and shoot up a school. How was that difficult, and what type of emotion did it bring out for you?
Sure. Well, I'll be honest. My first reaction was, can I really handle this, right? And I'm not one that would want to seek this out, because this involved children being murdered, faculty being murdered, and but I said to myself, it's my responsibility to go here, because I'm going again for my constituents. It's important for me to go so they don't have to go, right? And so
I appreciate that, because that's nothing that I would want to go and see.
and I was joined by school board members from Volusia County, Jesse Thompson from
I know Jesse.
Yes, yep,
Okay.
and also several others, Megan, right, from Brevard, and several others that were there, and there were other legislators there as well.
Okay.
And so, it was very difficult. It was probably one of the most difficult things I've had to experience in my lifetime. They literally walked us through the exact path of the shooter, and walk through, based on the camera and security footage and witness accounts and everything else, exactly what happened from the first floor all the way up to the third floor. And I can share some of that with you if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah. So, we started at the door that he entered, and he actually entered through a side door. He was dropped off by an Uber, hid the gun inside of a guitar case. That's how he disguised it. And when he got in the building, there was one student that walked in and saw him, and he said to that student, "You better get out of here. Something bad's about to happen." And so that student ran to notify the authorities on campus. But at that time, he just took out the gun and started walking down the hall and started shooting. So there were several that were shot in the hallway, and unfortunately, the doors onto some of the classrooms were locked. So those that were in the hallway could not get back into the class. They had nowhere to go.
Oh, wow.
And so I believe the teachers had to make a decision.
Do we open the door to let these students in?
Yeah.
Or do we keep the doors closed and keep the shooter out? I
Right.
mean, that's a hard decision that any educator would ever have to make. And educators should not be placed in positions where they have to make that decision. We're going to take a break. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Don't go anywhere, guys. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to Today with Pastor Jay. Mark, I just needed to take a break there because the next thought was going to be a little extensive. How much time I have so I can kind of get an idea?
Total about 14.
Perfect. That's perfect. Okay, you ready? Welcome back. Welcome back. You're listening to Today with Pastor Jay, and my highly esteemed guest is the Honorable Will Furry, school board member here for Flagler County, and he was just giving an account before the break about the gunman's walk and what he was doing. And the last thought was teachers being behind these locked classroom doors, the decision to open the door or keep the door closed. Were you able at this time during this tour where Did anyone discuss what the decisions or the teachers had made?
Just that they, in that light, that
Mm,
the door was locked and it didn't open, and those children that were in the hallway could not get back into there.
wow.
And there was a bathroom in that hallway, but it was locked because they were having a vaping problem, and they were kind of controlling it by having only the second story bathroom open for the entire building.
Oh,
So
wow.
there was no other place for them to hide. And one of the most challenging times and emotional times is when we walked into the first classroom where the first children were murdered, and that was Alex Schachter's son,
Hmm.
Max Schachter's son, Alex. And it was very difficult as he led us through this tour with some other officials. He was standing at the desk where his son was shot, and
Oh,
there was still the stain of blood on the
oh,
floor underneath his feet while he told us about it. So there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And this is a very strong man that is leading this charge, but I can tell he's a very broken man also. So my heart really goes out to him. I got to meet him, and we've communicated since then as well. But we moved on, and the shooter, the way it worked is he never entered a classroom. He shot through either the window or an open door.
mm,
And the problem is that there's a safe corner in every room that has the least visibility from the door.
okay.
And unfortunately, the way these classrooms were set up, many of them didn't have that where the way the class was set up, it allowed a clear view of all
Of
the
any corner, everything. There was no place to hide. So even
right.
though he didn't enter a classroom, there wasn't any place to hide. And I know Alyssa's law is something that's being discussed in honor of one of the Parkland victims, where you have a mobile panic button where staff can silently contact law enforcement in case of an on-campus threat. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, it's a necessary thing. Time is every second saves a life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm glad to announce that at our meeting last night, our school board meeting last night, we officially announced that we have implemented that system in Flagler schools. Has been tested and is active right now.
Mm,
So, and that is really where the timing is of the essence, because other breakdown here is that there was an SRO on campus, but unfortunately, it took him a minute and 45 seconds to get to that building. By the time he was notified and traveled to that, because it's a big campus, right?
mm-hmm. That's a huge campus.
Right. So by that time, everybody on the first floor had already
Been
been
shot,
murdered,
right.
or been shot, and but then that SRO did not enter the building. He never entered the building. Uh, Two other faculty members did, and then they were shot dead as well. Coach Aaron
Mm,
Feiss, which which we'll talk about later, but the Guardian program was named
mm-hmm. Right,
after him.
right,
He bravely went in there to try and help, and he was shot, and then another faculty member as well, and they were unarmed, right? And but
right.
the
But
S
they wanted to help.
right.
They saw students being gunned down. They hearing the screams and the cries, the shattered glass, the bullet holes. All these things are happening, and two people just said, "You know what? We need to go in and to help." And I'm gonna tell you, that would have been my first response. To help a child, to save a child, to help, but try to diffuse any type of situation. That's what you want to do. I want to talk about the Guardian program because Flagler County Schools, the school board, unfortunately, has voted down the Guardian program. I know when Janet McDonald and Joe Woolbright was on the school board, and Trevor Tucker was on the school board, and also we had Cheryl Massaro and Colleen Conklin that made up that school board. It was voted down during that
Yeah,
time.
and they had done some work beforehand, and
Uh
we
huh.
we picked up where they left
Right.
off
So,
and brought it forward.
okay. So here it is. We're in your school term now as the school board member, and it was voted down.
It was voted down.
Now, how did you vote
I
on
voted
the Guardian
for
program?
the Guardian program. It was part of my campaign, and I'm a firm believer, especially after now, even more
Mm-hmm.
validating that decision was going through this Parkland scenario tour, because see. In that scenario that where there was a total breakdown, that SRO did not go into the building. So even if we had a willing SRO at that campus, right?
Right.
By the time he arrived there,
It,
already several have been already
mm-hmm.
shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But imagine if Coach Aaron was armed as a guardian,
Exactly.
right? And that is why this program came from this tragedy,
It
right?
came from this tragedy.
Yes.
Let's arm some of our teachers, our faculty, and our
Mhm.
staff. Give them the training, the proper training, the proper education, not for them to take the place of a school resource officer or a deputy, but in order for them to protect our students. Because unfortunately, these shootings are happening all over the United States. Um, Time and time and time again, where we have gunmen that are walking into schools and they're shooting, or people are having mental health issues, having breakdown. Things are happening, and we need to arm. It's an unfortunate thing. Who wants to do this? Nobody wants to shoot. And I'm going to tell you right now, just as a parent, as a community member, I would not even think about wanting to end the life of anyone, nevertheless a child. Who wants to be placed in that situation? But here we are, had someone, a lone gunman, just shooting up, just randomly just shooting whoever was in their path. And the Guardian program, had it been implemented 5 years ago at this particular school, would have been able to help save some of those lives.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a force multiplier. This would complement the SRDs that we have here on
Correct.
campus right now. But we have very large campuses, and
Oh my goodness. I heard
just like
that
Parkland.
FPC, Flagler Palm Coast High School, it's a small city within itself.
And this is something that is a well designed program. Over 40 counties use it in school districts across Florida, and mind you that those that are that if they make it past the psychological interview and the background check and everything else, then there's 144 hours of training that's done by the sheriff's office, and this program is in conjunction with the sheriff, right? So that your sheriff has to be on board with it. And Sheriff Staley has always said that he would support it as long as it was a full multiplier, not to replace.
Correct.
And I 100% agree with him on that.
Right. So you weren't the only one that had voted for the Guardian program. Also, Christy Chong, I know she had voted for the Guardian program. And I'm going to tell you that Sally Hunt, Cheryl Massaro, and Colleen Conklin voted it down. It did not pass. And it's an unfortunate thing that it didn't pass and that it failed. And I'm hoping that it's something that come back up again.
Yeah, it will. I believe that it will. I'm optimistic that within my term we will get there. I'm hoping sooner than later, right? But right now the agenda is set by the chair and the superintendent, and so we can ask to get it back on. But right now, there doesn't seem to be support for it. So if I bring it back, it may just end up falling again.
So again, Sally Hunt, those of you who are listening, if you know Sally Hunt, if you know Cheryl Massaro, you know Colleen Conklin, you need to call them and say, hey, we need the Guardian program. I mean, the sheriff's department, we have a phenomenal sheriff. He's doing a great job. The training is great. And it's ongoing training, I'm sure. It's not like we're just going to take a gun and put it in the arms of someone. We're saving lives. Lives need to be saved, and it's an unfortunate thing. We have campuses, like you said, that are large. Several buildings, just several floors. And to have school resource deputies on one end of the campus and something breaks out on another end of the campus, it's important to have something else in place.
Well, and you bring up floors, and that was another thing that happened in the Parkland shooting. Is the second floor, they heard the gunshots, and then they started leaving the building, right, down the fire escape. And then what happened was the fire alarm triggered, and now all of a sudden every single building now is evacuating because they think it's a fire drill or there's a fire. So outside all the other buildings, the kids are going out. But by the time it was the third floor, they got to the third floor, they didn't really know, other than the gunshots at that point, that there was a shooting going on. So again, if there had been a guardian on the second floor or the third floor, they may have been able to stop it right there. Right?
Correct. And they've been able to save additional lives, because once the children start exiting and evacuating the building, then they become potential targets to a gunman.
And that was the blessing because he did go to the after he was done on the third floor, he went to the teacher's lounge, which had windows that looked out over the campus, where there were thousands of kids now walking out of the because the fire alarm went off. And he shot his AR-15 or whatever it was out that window, and the bullets did not go through because it was hurricane glass. Had
Wow.
those windows been able to open,
Right.
or had been normal windows, he tried several times. I saw at least 6 or 7 bullet holes in those
Where he
windows.
tried to shoot out into the crowd of the students
It,
that had gathered thinking that it was a fire drill.
right, and if that had happened, this would have been just a worse massacre than it was.
All right. Well, we got to take a break. Don't go anywhere. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to Today with Pastor Jay. 4 minutes. Okay. Oh, I need to recruit. It's taken me everything not to cry during all of this. And I know it has for you as well.
It
Because
was a
just,
very.
ugh.
There wasn't a dry eye from anybody, especially when the father that led the tour was standing at that desk with where his son had died. You could just see the brokenness in that man. But I commend him for being courageous and carrying on, making something good out of a bad situation. Right.
Amen. All right. You ready? I'm going to give a thank you and a shout out to Steve Verrier. Thank you for sponsoring Today with Pastor Jay, the FloridaMortgageCenter.com, and Church on a Rock. Thank you for always making sure that I have a voice. You know, during the break, I just talked about how challenging it was, even during the show, for me not to break down and just start bawling and crying, because it's such an emotional thing, because you want to choose life. You want children to have a future. You want them to have a hope, right? And your children dream of that. And they go to school. You expect to go to school to be educated, not to be gunned down. You expect to go to school to be educated and not indoctrinated. You expect to go to school just to go to school. That's it. Just to be a kid again, to go to school, pick up some books, laugh, play football, play soccer, whatever it is you want to do, get in a band or do nothing. Maybe you just want to do arts or something, and go home, and you repeat day after day after day. You do that for 12 years. You don't expect to go to be gunned down. And times have changed. When you and I were in school, right? Times have changed. What do we say to that? What do we do now? And how do we ensure the safety of our children? Because the Guardian program, I mean, there's no cookie cutter, this is the best answer, whether it's a school resource deputy. Because I remember when school resource officers weren't allowed on campus. That's a fairly new thing, dating back a few years. But, that wasn't always around. And then it's the Guardian program. What can we do in the meanwhile? Because your efforts of getting the Guardian program has fallen. So what can we do now? What can citizens do? Flagler County citizens, what can we do? How do we educate our children? What are the answers? And I know I'm asking you a lot, but you're a parent, right?
Yes.
And you have children. How do you prepare them to go to school, to get an education, and come home safely?
Yeah. Well, what I would say to parents is it's important to have a conversation with your children and remind them, I feel Flagler schools are safe, right? But listen, Marjory Stoneman Douglas, that's a very affluent area. It's a low crime area. You wouldn't think this is going to happen there, right?
Right.
Flagler is very similar in the sense that we're just a small town, and not a lot happens here. We have great sheriff, and the pieces, we have peace here, right? But don't let that let you rest on your laurels because of that, right? And so we do. Safety and security has always been the most important thing for me when it comes to school. But when it comes to my children, I don't speak fear to them, but I do speak to them that, you just need to be aware, right? And if you see something, say something. And this is important because the Parkland shooter, there were all kinds of signs that this child was very disturbed. And when the shooting happened, everybody said, it must be this person before they even knew it.
Wow.
And
so
even
the
teachers
signs were there. The teachers knew. The students knew. They're not surprised.
Right. They were not surprised. So there's obvious signs out there. And, so parents, guardians, when you notice these things, right, have a talk with your child. Get them the help or the counseling that they may need, right? Notify the school of your concerns, right? So that we could maybe get ahead of something like this before it becomes a tragedy.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing. And I did real good. I didn't even talk about the big brawl that happened at Matanzas High School, right? That's
Yes.
a whole nother subject. But
Yes.
again,
Yes.
we got to say something. We got to do something. We got to be involved. Thank you so very much for sharing. And thank you for going to visit and bringing that experience back to Flagler County.
Yes, you're
All right. God
welcome.
bless
Thank
you.
you
All
for
right,
having me
guys.
on.
You know what I say? Yesterday's gone. Tomorrow's not promised. What are you going to do today? You're going to remember that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. God bless you. See something, say something. Have a great day. Bye, guys.